We're talking today with Roger Healy of Gobles, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Roger, begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Allegan, Michigan. We lived in Bloomingdale my first 5 years of my life.
And what year were you born?
1949.
Okay.
I was put into school at 4 years old. I was next to the youngest person in there.
Mm-hmm.
But I went to kindergarten in Bloomingdale, and then we moved to a farm in Gobles. And I lived there on that 5-acre farm for 10 years till I was 14. Graduated from Gobles.
Okay, the high school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and what year did you graduate from high school?
67.
Okay, and what did you do after you got out of high school?
I went to 1 year of college at Southwestern Michigan in Dowagiac. I was 17 when I got in, and there's no way I should have been. I always felt that I've been one step behind trying to catch up. Mm-hmm. I was the biggest. This is why they put me in there at 4. But I wasn't up to speed on on things and that. I never had a brother. I had 2 sisters. So I never was able to experience that. So I have a lot of brothers that they don't know that they're my brothers, but I don't have that many anymore. My best brother is right over there, and that he's here right now. But
okay, so
drafted in July 15th, 69.
Okay, so you had basically about a year between when you left school and when you got drafted?
No, I went to school for a year and it wasn't for me, so I went to work for an electrical company, IBEW, building steel towers and street lights, different things like that when I was drafted.
All right. Now this is a point when you finish high school in 67 and then you try college and you go to work. That's when the Vietnam War has really heated up and the draft is going full blast. Were you basically expecting that you were going to get drafted at some point?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was your attitude toward that? Were you just going to take it when it came, or?
I didn't necessarily come from a military family, but I grew up knowing the system, knowing, you enlist or not enlist. When you turn 18, you
register for the draft.
Register, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just rode the wave, I just did what I was told.
Okay.
And I had planned for it, I guess, my whole life, more or less.
Okay, so you just kind of expected that was something you were going to do at that time. Okay, did you pay any attention to the news before you went in? Did you follow the stuff about what was happening in Vietnam?
Not a lot. You only needed to see it once that you knew what, you kind of knew what was going on, and just pray to God and cross your fingers and all that stuff.
Okay. All right, so you get drafted in the middle of 69. What's the process now? You get the draft notice, what do you do next?
Well, a friend of mine got his notice, a classmate of mine, and he had 30 days. And so we were doing the normal riding around out on the back roads, feeling sorry for him and all that. Well, 2 weeks later, Nixon gave me a letter for the same day.
Mm-hmm.
So those 2 weeks were going, oh man, and this and that. So, and when the time came, at least I had a friend, a classmate that we were good friends.
Okay.
And we went through basic training in Fort Knox.
Where did you report to first?
Paw, Michigan.
Okay.
A small house they had the office in. And
so just like
still there, just went by it yesterday.
Was that like a recruiter's office, or?
Yeah, I guess it probably was.
Yeah, or an armory or something.
No, just a small stucco house.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And then they send you then to Fort Knox.
Well, we went to Detroit.
Okay.
And is where we were inducted, and Then we went by bus down to Fort Knox.
Did you get a physical at Detroit?
Yes.
Okay. Now, sometimes you hear stories about people trying to game the system and do things
All
to,
around you.
Okay. So did you observe any of that? What were people doing?
Oh yeah. Sleeping with bars of soap on their armpits so that their temperature would be raised. So they just say, you know, as simple as that they were doing, you know.
Okay. Did that fool anybody?
I don't know. I didn't pay attention. I
Okay.
was just kind of doing my own, you know, in my own world.
All right. All right.
We
So
did
now-
we did go to Canada. About 8 of us, Max and I, my buddy. We got on a bus and went through the tunnel and went to Canada because you could drink at 18, I guess,
Mhm.
or something there at that time. And so we went over there and had a pitcher of beer, passed it around, and this and that. We looked around and we go, well, what are we going to do now? We looked at each other and we just got up, went back to the bus station, and we just, you know, none of us were going to stay. We
Yeah.
just went because we could.
Sure. Okay. That's,
Last bit of freedom, kind of.
all right. Well, had you reported in by then, or did you do that kind of on the way over there?
It was after the physical and things like that.
Okay. So they actually let you
It was-
out.
It was overnight.
Okay.
It was stayed in the Ford Hotel, I think they called it. And they were throwing televisions out. I mean, it was chaos all around us, but
Okay.
we were hometown, you know, back country boys.
Mhm.
We just watched them, and
Okay. So there were a lot of people there who were not happy to be there.
probably,
Okay. All right. But now you take a bus down to Fort Knox, or do they fly you down? Or?
yeah, we took a bus down to Fort Knox.
Okay. And what kind of reception do you get at Fort Knox?
Well, I'm pretty sure it was dark, and we were tired and just wanted a place to sleep, and that's what we was given quarters and place to sleep.
Okay. So they didn't start yelling at you right away?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because the Army varies with that kind of thing. The Marines always yell at you.
Back then, it was kind of it was being phased out a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but they still got in your face a lot. But
Okay. But that didn't start the night you got there?
no,
Okay. Now, did they process you for a couple of days, or what happens then?
yeah, processing, and then they tested us aptitude or whatever to see what our background had been, and heck, I didn't know what to fill in and that. I would have done it differently if I'd have known, but our past skills and things that, you know, I'd driven truck and farm machinery and all that stuff, but I never wrote it down. When we were in the firing range, I was hiding from the silhouettes and just shooting at the top instead of doing what I should have, or I would have probably been a sniper, or they would have wanted me for a sniper because I deer hunted. I had killed 5 deer by the time I'd, you know, starting at 14 and that, and with 1 shot, and but I'm glad that I didn't. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I don't think. I don't think.
So what designation do you get? Do they make you infantryman or something else?
Well, it was Fort Knox is infantry, but the second day they marched us down to another company area or whatever, and this and that. They marched us through, and we went in, and I think we got our clothes and stuff like that or whatever. But anyway, we got back into formation, and they called my name. They said, "Fall out." I'm going, what did I do wrong? Well, they said, "You're the platoon guide." They put sergeant stripes on me and said, "Take them back to the company area." And I'm going, what? So somehow I just kind of did what the drill sergeants had been doing, you know, and so I took them back, and I was given my own room in the barracks, and I lasted. I don't know how I lasted, how long it was, a month or so, maybe 4 weeks or something. But I had to get up before everybody else and go around and take sick sick call and do all this stuff and get down there. Well, I was never a morning person, never, still aren't. So I came home probably after 4 weeks, 5 weeks, I don't know, into it, and it was a daily basis that my foot locker was upside down and my stand-up locker was, they just came in because I didn't do the right things, place my stuff right.
Yeah.
If I'd have been smart, I would have employed some of the other people. Max would have been a perfect one to have, he would have done that for me, and I'd have, you know, and but I was back in the ranks with the rest of them, and just went along with it because you know, I wasn't a leader, never was. I was I was the youngest one in every group, so I was just floating around following everybody.
Okay.
All of a sudden, here I am leading 32 people and keeping them in line and this and that and whatever, and I didn't do it right.
Okay. Now, physically, was the training very demanding, or could you handle that?
Yeah, it was, once we got in shape, but I was I worked on the farm, we baled hay and this and that, and then when I worked, it was physical, so yeah, that worked out pretty good, I guess.
Okay. And could you adjust to just following orders? Was that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I had readied myself for, you know, there's got to be a top of the pyramid, and you know, right there, and then our remaining thing is the DI,
Okay.
and the rest of us, but down from there. But
So you just kind of did what they told you to do and got through it.
you know,
Okay. So how long was basic?
you know, I've never really paid attention to that, because I was in. It's hard to, because what happened after that, I was in country longer than I would have if I'd have just gone through basic AIT and then shipped out. But I lost track of things when when we were in AIT, I don't know if you want to
Well, yeah.
skip forward to
Well,
that.
no, we wanted to reach. So the basic training is normally at that point about 8 weeks. At least that's the standard course, unless you get hurt or something and stay longer. And then
Okay,
from
yeah,
there,
that's about right.
okay, and then you get the advanced individual training, AIT.
Yeah.
And where did you do that?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Okay.
I believe we flew down there. Might have been a bus, but I think I think that was the
You might have
first time
flown by
I'd
then.
been on an airplane.
Okay.
So we went down, we went through that,
And what kind of training was that?
infantry,
Okay.
combat, Vietnam.
All right. And what kinds of things did they do there to try to prepare you for Vietnam?
Well, the terrain and the climate kind of was similar to Vietnam, except for in the wintertime, and it was 17 degrees down there. When the monsoons in Vietnam, you felt like it was 17 degrees when the monsoons, if you got wet, I mean, you had to take care of yourself. But they had Heartbreak Hill and several different pretty tall, not mountains,
But hills or ridges or whatever?
pretty good ones, yeah. And we did full pack and just a lot of training and more of the same.
Okay. Was there a difference in terms of how you were treated in AIT as opposed to how you were treated in basic, or was it still pretty much the same?
It was probably about the same. I think it was starting to ease up from what previous soldiers or whatever had to deal with. But it didn't bother me that much. So I just got through it somehow.
All right. Now, did they try to teach you anything about Vietnam in terms of the people or the society or dealing with civilians or anything like that?
Mostly weapons, just getting to know the weapons and that stuff. No, I don't really think that there was that much going on about what was there, what the people were there doing.
Okay. Now, were any of your instructors people who had been to Vietnam?
Probably. I really couldn't tell you.
Okay. Because if they're not telling you things about Vietnam, then you might well not know.
Well, they were kind of private. There's one sergeant I remember that got busted to an E1 because he borrowed money from some of us, and they found out about it and that, so they didn't kick him out. They just busted him from an E5 to an E1, and so he was back on the ladder. But he was someone who couldn't survive on the out. You know, he had better than prison. He was in the service. He was able to be, you know, but he was the type of person that just wouldn't have made it on the outside.
Okay.
Back in those days, you know, is what I figured, you know.
All right. Now AIT is normally also about 8 weeks. Do you think that's what? Okay. So what happens to you after AIT?
We were standing in formation again, and they were passing out, or calling names and passing out orders. And the next thing we knew, they called 8 of us out of the formation. And they said we didn't get enough volunteers for NCO school, so you 8 are going to NCO school. So we got orders. We went home for 30 days and then reported to Fort Benning, Georgia, for NCO school.
Okay, that's non-commissioned officer school for people who don't
Right.
know. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And so what was that program like?
Well, there wasn't as much people being in your face more. It was a little bit more mature, and you know, we more or less knew what to do. We knew what was going on and things like, so it went a little bit smoother than that.
Okay. And physically, what did they make you do?
The obstacle courses were somewhat more, you know, using a rope to get across water, you know, and just a little bit more intense than what the basic, you know, it just went up a little bit more. And then we knew, you know, it was all infantry training, so we knew.
Okay. And did they give you any training in leadership or in tactics or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know how far long into that was I decided that I didn't want to tell anybody what to do.
Okay.
They can tell me what to do, and I'll decide how I'm going to do it. I'll get the job done, but I'm not going to be stupid about it.
Okay.
And about the same time, a buddy that had been in basic in AIT, another Michigan guy, we sat down one day, and he was married and had 2 kids and stuff, and he says, man, he says, I want to get this over with. And he had more or less made up his mind that he was going to go home. We dropped out is what we did. And he went home and I went home, and we'd keep in contact, and he'd say, yeah, I'm not ready. He says, I'm not ready to go. And I said, well, just call me when you are. Well, 8 days later, we finally reported.
Okay. So were you AWOL, or had you?
We
were
were
talking.
8 days AWOL.
Okay.
We
And
got,
was that before you went to Fort Benning, or was it after you got there and you did it for a while and then went away?
this is after we got our orders for Vietnam,
Okay.
after we quit Fort Benning at
Okay.
the NCO school.
Okay. So I'm just trying to sort out the sequence. So basically, you go through part of NCO school, but you don't finish, and then you are able to tell the Army basically, I don't want to do this, and then they say, okay, you're going to go to Vietnam now. Was that? So you get orders for Vietnam, and you have some time before you have to report.
We had 30 days legally, and then
Yeah.
we were about 38 days when we ended up reporting to in Oakland,
Okay.
California.
All right. Now, when you got there, were you in any trouble for being 8 days late?
We got busted at the E1s and spent 2 weeks in a barracks. And then we got on a plane and went to Vietnam.
All right. You remember, was it like a chartered civilian plane or a
Yes.
military? Okay. All right. And do you remember if you stopped anywhere?
Yeah, we stopped in Hawaii, we stopped in Wake Island, we stopped in Guam, and then I think it was, and I don't know because I actually did the whole thing twice,
Okay.
and I might tell you that later, but because going over there and coming back once and then going back over and coming back, they took different routes.
Right.
It was a different thing. One time we went through Alaska. I think that's when I came home, though. We came through Alaska with it.
Okay.
But
All right. But Wake Island would have been on the way from Hawaii because that's a natural kind of jump, and
Yeah.
so was Guam. So,
Yeah.
and if the plane wasn't big enough to fly the whole distance, then you refuel. Okay.
Right.
So where did you land in Vietnam?
Probably, well, I got assigned to the 25th Infantry, which was in Cu Chi, but I don't know if it would have been,
Probably Tan Son Nhut.
I was
'cause
going to
that's-
say Tan Son Nhut or Cam Ranh Bay, but that was, I had malaria twice, so I was there for 2 weeks a couple of times.
Well,
But
you-
it was probably Tan Son Nhut.
Okay. Now, when you were going to Vietnam, did you know what unit you were joining, or okay? So you're just a general replacement at that point. Okay. When did you arrive in Vietnam?
Pooh. It was February,
Be 1970 now.
right. I was there 11 months, 19 days, so I
All
was
right.
never very good at math, so.
Okay. So basically, early 1970 is when you arrived there. Okay.
Right.
And what was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
The smell.
Can you describe it?
I'd never smelled anything like it. It was, I guess, a conglomeration of gunpowder and latrines and incense, probably smoke and different things. It was just hard to.
Mm-hmm.
It was just to the point of making you making you sick. But you sooner or later got used to it.
Okay. Now, did you land during the day or at night?
I believe it was nighttime. Most every time we got transported, it seemed like it was nighttime. So I didn't really get a good look at things coming in,
Okay.
get a lay of the land or anything like that.
All right. So once you land, what happens to you?
I guess they probably issued us uniforms and some equipment, no weapons at that time. And I don't know how long I kicked around before I reported, because I ran into people that I knew, people that had been in basic or AIT or something, and they had been there for a while, because I spent 5 weeks or whatever in with NCO school,
Right.
so I was behind again, kind of, but it worked out. But two of the guys that I remember their names and faces, but I saw them coming. I was, oh man, cool. There's somebody, I can get some information on what to do here. And they, hey, how you doing? And just kept on. What the heck? They turned around. Well, they had been on an ambush, and they were on a poncho liner. They're in rice paddies, and everything was flying in that. And a Chi-Com grenade got tossed in, and they tossed. I guess they split. They left their M60 machine gun there, and they got out of there, and they weren't injured. But they came to the rear, and they said, "We're re-enlisted. We're going to Japan." And I'm going, wait a minute, I don't know if that's what I want to do. And then I ran into a buddy from high school and this and that, and he was just about ready to ETS. He was going home. But he let me camp out there in his hooch for a few days and that, and I finally got homesick and wanted to get some mail. And I don't know if it was a week or a month or whatever, but I finally went and reported.
Okay. So you basically were just kind of
I
there,
was shooting pool, going from a NCO or a
club to another.
club to another, and just feeling the place out and that.
Okay. So now you show up and they have orders for you?
They assigned me to 25th Infantry Division, 1st to the 5th Mechanized,
Mm-hmm.
which I wasn't going to kick there. So we were able to ride to our ambush points and that, riff during the day, and then they'd drop us off and we'd set up an ambush, and they'd go back to the night logger and come back in a day, 2 days, a week, or whatever, you know, however long we were out there.
All right. And what kind of vehicles did you have?
Armored personnel carriers.
So it's like the M113 mostly? Or
Yeah.
Okay, so standard, a big box on a tank chassis.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, but you still fight normally as infantry. You would dismount, and if you're going to go out and engage.
If and when we ran into it, thankfully we didn't get a lot of it towards the end, but
Okay, but that's the unit you're assigned to. Now, where was the unit at that time?
Coochie.
Okay, and explain a little bit about where Coochie was and what sort of place it was.
Well, it seems like every time I look at a map of Vietnam, it was near Saigon, but it seems like I thought it was in one spot and it's in a different one or whatever, but and what they know about Coochie now is crazy, but I don't know. I don't really know what happened between there and then. The next thing I knew, I was on top of a APC, and we're going out in the jungles, rice paddies, rubber plantations. We went from there towards Cambodia, Tay Ninh, Dao Tiang, Camp Frenzel, Firebase Frenzel Jones, and back to Coochie, where the 25th was based at.
Yeah, that was their headquarters area. Okay. Now, so are you joining basically an infantry squad that has its own armored personnel carrier? Or is that?
No, it was a whole company.
Okay. So you have a company, and then, but a company isn't going to all fit in one carrier, so you have to have multiple vehicles.
Well, a squad was a 10-man driver, 50 gunner, and then 8 personnel, so there was 10 altogether. Is what the vehicle was designed for, to get inside.
Right.
And which was a no-no. We rode on top.
Okay. So why would
Most
you
of the
ride on
time.
top rather than inside?
Because of landmines. The concussion that would, it was better to be on top, sitting on ammo boxes full of grenades and ammos and whatever you could find to sit on for a seat.
Okay. And were there roads and trails to drive on, or did you just?
Most of the time we had 2 trackers. We were in the Michelin rubber plantation and BF Goodrich. We were there a lot. In surrounding areas, we'd go out on rifts. They call it rift, and kind of like recon or something like that. But we'd all ride on the vehicle until we guys said, "Okay, here's where you're gonna." And we'd get off just before dark and set up the ambush and just pull guard duty. And
Okay. All right. So you're sort of there for a period of 2-3 months or whatever before the invasion of Cambodia happens, because the Americans officially start
that was
going
in
in.
May.
That's in May.
May
But you're there.
7th.
But you're there a couple months before that gets going. So was that time mostly one of just sort of driving around and going back and forth?
Well, they'd gone into Vietnamization. They had, instead of going out in a company, we were going out in squads. It was broken down into squads.
Okay.
We didn't, and it was a whole different ballgame, and nobody really knew what was going on. Even the guys that had seen, had been in country for a while. So we were all, we counted on our Chu Hoi scouts, which were, they surrendered and came over to our side, and they were Kit Carson's. Chu Hoi, they Chu Hoi'd, which is their, but we relied on them quite a bit. You could just watch their eyes. If they you know, you grabbed your weapon and you just watched it, true or low, one of the two, because we trusted them. They were good kids.
Okay.
They're good guys. They were probably older. They were older than us, but
All right. So you're just going out with an individual squad with one armored personnel carrier, just going out someplace by yourselves?
Yeah, I think we probably traveled in what we had left. There was usually 4 armored personnel carriers to a platoon,
Okay.
a squad in each one.
Right.
And when one got destroyed, we jumped, you know.
Yeah. Were your squads full strength, or were you usually missing some people?
The squads, I guess, we got resupplied, you know, that as far as that, but E6s, E5s, and E6s, and I've got a thing printed out that we were very low in a lot of places in as far as officers.
Okay. So you don't have enough sergeants of the right rank, and you don't have enough lieutenants to lead the platoons.
Well, Spec 4s were
Yeah.
brought up to take care of it, you know, to fill the spot and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, was there much actual fighting going on at this point, or just IEDs, or?
The Vietnamization was for us to go out and find it.
Okay.
We were in a no-fire zone. You couldn't fire unless fired upon. And then you were supposed to get, you know, clearance, but, you know, that didn't happen. We could see the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I remember watching it with the naked eye. We could see them, and there wasn't a thing we could do.
Okay. So you're kind of getting up to the Cambodian border at that point, and
We were back and forth.
Yeah.
The 2 months before we went in, or the 3 months that I was there. And in the meantime, the track that I was on, 3-2 track, with 3rd Platoon, or 3rd Squad, the driver, he said, man, I'm done. I'm leaving. Well, he says, well, who's going to drive this rig? And I was the FNG. I was
You're the new guy.
and looked around and nobody's saying anything. And I'm going, well, hell, I'll drive this thing. I'd seen what, you know, and I'd had enough farm life and stuff like that. So they said, there it is. So I was assigned to me and the 50 gunner were assigned to the APC.
Okay.
We'd rift all day long and then drop everybody else off, and then we'd go back to the night logger and then pull guard. There were just the 2 of us, so we'd have to pull guard ourselves at night.
Okay. So the night loggers were where a group of vehicles would be together,
I
kind of
called
in
it
a
a
circle?
wagon wheel. We'd pull in and just follow the lead all the way around, so that, and then we'd do a 90-degree, so we were all facing out, and go out and set our trip flares and our claymores and put our RPG screens up in front,
All right. Now, when you were in that kind of situation, would the Vietnamese, would they probe you or attack you, or did they leave you alone?
no, they would. Well, they had the bomb craters. A 10,000-pound bomb leaves a big hole in that. Well, they would hide in those and then just hold their AKs and fire above us over the top. Well, it was a diversion. On the other side of the night logger, they would crawl in and turn the claymores around and things like that. So when you hit the clacker, it would blow 100,000 BBs at us instead of them. And they would do things like that. I got to say, the only one I guess that we got in was pulled in a night logger one night or one afternoon, and I just got off, and everybody had all the duffel bags and everything on a litter, so you know, all their belongings, everything in that. And I went over and laid down on them, and I fell asleep, and I dreamt that there were Cobra jets and gunships. I mean, I dreamt that all this. I woke up in the morning and looked around, and it had actually happened, and I slept through it. I was so tired. that I slept through that, but I actually,
You dreamed a firefight, and there was one.
you know,
Well, how
which
did-
would have been a nightmare.
Mhm. Yeah. Now, so did that do much damage to your unit, or did
There
you-
were some people missing, and it was all small arms.
Mhm.
Well, it must have been more than just small arms fire from NVA or
Mhm.
VC, whichever it was. I don't know if we ever found out. Excuse me, but I was very lucky. We didn't have a whole lot of contact.
Okay.
We did a lot of time guarding things, like I
Mhm.
say, the rubber plantations and things like that.
Right.
We went out one time at night. Nobody had ever done that before, you know, black
Mhm.
light, dark, and that was a trip. But I got to say that it could have been a whole lot worse.
Mhm. Okay. Now, did you, aside from the Kit Carson Scouts, I mean, did you work with any of the South Vietnamese military?
Arvin,
Yeah.
yep.
Now, did you work with them before the Cambodian incursion, or only after that started?
I think we probably worked with them. It was the whole year I was there. It was off and on,
Mm-hmm.
but they just didn't want to. You know, when something happened, they'd go the other way, and 100 yards or something where they were safe, and they'd be just sitting there going, oh,
Mhm.
man. And you couldn't blame them. I mean, for crying out loud, it was yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most of them would have been draftees and probably didn't want to be there either, and then didn't necessarily have the
No.
level of training that you did or anything else. But so they were there, but you didn't see them as a particularly effective fighting force at that point.
They had brand new M16s. They had brand new fatigues. They had brand new armored personnel carriers that never been off the road. Ours we'd busted jungles. You could pull up on a tree that big around and knock it down.
All right. So, what's it like to drive an armored personnel carrier?
It's like driving a bulldozer somewhat, only you're in the front left-hand corner instead of in the middle of it.
Mhm.
But just laterals. We had extended laterals to ride on top. They had the motor pool made extended laterals so we could set up.
So you could sort of basically stick your head out of the top and look around rather than just being downside.
There's a round manhole cover that
Mhm.
flips over to the rear.
Yep.
And then I put a cushion or whatever on top of that. So I actually had my feet on that. And then we had a long pole for the accelerator where there were 350 diesel
Mhm.
Oldsmobiles, I guess. I thought they were Chevys, but that's all it was moving that 13-ton vehicle.
Okay. All right. So basically, if possible, you preferred to be up top driving rather than buttoned up inside the vehicle.
It was required. If one time one of my laterals broke, so I had to leave them behind, and I had to ride in down inside.
Mm-hmm.
But well, first day in Cambodia, I hit a landmine, 70-pound landmine. It was right, took out the drive sprocket on my side, so I was five feet above that, and it rocked us up, took my track off and everything. It knocked a couple of guys off. Everybody's ears were bleeding, but mine.
Mm-hmm.
I still have perfect hearing, probably more than perfect. But I was back on the ground then.
Okay. So if you had been in the original driver's seat down
If I'd
inside the
been
vehicle,
in there, I would have, I don't know,
killed or badly wounded. Yeah.
probably the closeness of it and everything, there's no place for it to go.
Yeah.
But that's why we were up on top.
Okay. All right. Now, so the big operation or whatever that you're involved in initially is that incursion into Cambodia. It starts at the beginning of May. Now, did you have any kind of build-up or preparation for it? Did you have any idea that you were going to be doing it until the day it happened?
Maybe a day or so, something like that.
Okay. And did they tell you what you were doing or why you were doing it?
Well, we pretty much knew. We were still in the no-fire. I think it was still a no-fire zone. I remember the night before, it was dark when we got there, and they'd walk us and then say, okay, 90 degrees, that's Cambodia, across that river. So we're sitting side by side like that, and somebody said, well, no, they didn't tell us. But anyway, we heard movement. They said there's a little bridge out there, a footbridge, and it's right out there. I don't know how far they said or whatever and this and that. And they said, but that's the only thing. Well, there were Marines out there, and we heard them Marines, and I guess I gave the command to open up with a 50. And of course, we were shooting through the Constantine wire that we had for protection on the front. For RPGs, and one of them did catch a fragment of one of them had to be dusted off anyway. We didn't know they were out there.
So there were actually U.S. Marines there?
Yeah.
Okay, because I thought the Marines were normally up north and not down in the Saigon area. But that's what they told you they were.
It was dark and never saw anybody. It was just firing at the sound, because they said there was a little bridge, and that's where it looked like they pointed from. But it was I don't know how many down there, but there were U.S. Marines there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then, do you go forward at daybreak, or?
Well, they were still putting the bridge together.
Okay.
Floating bridge. And I think it was about noon. We started crossing that bridge, and at that time I was driving at that time, the 3-2 track, and I was the 5th one across that bridge that day.
And how long was it before you hit the mine?
It was near the end of the day. We split up. I think half the battalion went south and half of us went north, and we would go through villages, and they were coming with armloads of bananas and I don't know, anything that they had indigenous to them. They were just piling it up on the track. Just it was crazy.
So they were happy to see you.
Oh, it was like, oh my word, look at this and look at that. Smiling and the whole 9 yards. And when we came back out 2 weeks later, our unit actually came, we were there for 2 weeks, and you couldn't give them a case of sea rations for a banana. It was, I mean, it was the Garden of Eden. When we went into Cambodia, was what Vietnam used to look like. It was just like, there's a place in Arizona, Cave Creek, up in that area. There's like a mist. It's like you're just in some place that you've never been before, and that's the way Cambodia was when we went in there. Okay. But after the airstrikes and the B-52s, it was just bomb craters, and it was hard to be in the skin.
Okay, so on that first day, was there any opposition aside from the mines?
Oh yeah, there was all kinds of, a lot of stuff going all around. There was VC and NVA both encamped in those, and you didn't know, so everything was just being leveled. And there were a few that popped out and were killed. I only actually saw one U.S. casualty that day. But you're busy driving, you know,
Mhm.
when you're trying to maneuver and this and that and stuff. You can't really take in a lot of the other stuff.
Okay. So after you hit the mine, now what happens? Your vehicle is disabled. So what happens to you and your squad then?
Well, I want to go back a little bit.
Okay.
Going to it, I was the 22nd vehicle in line. We were going down a two-track road,
Right.
and like I say, I was the 22nd in line, and there was one APC behind me. And I hit the mine, and Ron Seifert from Ohio was behind me. And he knew he was good, but he immediately pulled around us, and they said I was tracking. I was tracking like, you know, didn't drift off, so it had to either be a step down mine, which it clicks down so many times and then blows, or they detonated
It was a
it.
command detonated mine.
We never knew.
So when you were tracking, you were following exactly in the tracks of the one in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People behind and everybody and the guys on it, they said I was doing the right thing. Well, the whole company just kept on going. Or battalion, would have been the battalion. And Ron just pulled around and he says, "Here, let's get the cables hooked up." And he started hooking the cables up proper to tow me, and my track was blown apart, so it was, and it hung up on the rear bogey wheel and was dragging behind us 10 or 15 feet beside us. So that was like, and we're sitting on top, he's towing us, and I'm going, man, if that thing hits a mine, you know, whatever, this and that. But we followed well, actually, when he was driving it, I looked back and I saw deuce and a half, or five, I didn't know it was so far back. The doors came open and there were stars on the side. There was not supposed to be anything but mechanized armored vehicles.
Okay. But the deuce and a half's just regular trucks.
Deuce and a halves are not armored. And we didn't know if an RPG was going to come our way. Turned out, I've found out in the last year, that there were actually tired rubbered vehicles over there. But we didn't know, but we just got in there and hauled ass and finally got to the night logger where we were at. And the next day they brought a sky hook, one of the big choppers, brought that over into Cambodia, and they picked my APC up and I watched it.
Okay. So now what do? You lost your vehicle.
Well, I had to go get on another one. And I remember they had a partially bombed out bridge over a river. And I've never really figured out where that was at yet. But we were left behind, I guess because there was too many of us to go out or something, but we guarded that bridge. And the rest of them went out and they caught Scunion. It was some bad news that they got into that day. But I think we guarded that bridge. It must have been the 2 weeks that we were there.
Okay.
And set up ambushes. That's the first ambush. Well, it wasn't the second one. I popped one. Somehow one of Papa San's pigs had swum across the river and came and tripped one of our trip flares. And I don't know. Well, I actually blew a claymore on the pig. And the next morning, the hunter found it, or the farmer found it on the other side of the river. And, well, he ended up cooking it and invited us.
Okay.
You know,
So
we killed his pig. I don't know if anybody ever paid for it or not, but
so aside from the pig, were you left alone while you were there?
yeah.
Okay. So kind of a quiet way to spend an invasion.
A South Vietnamese general He had 6 toes on each foot because they wore flip-flops. And we'd heard about him. He come walking across that bridge one day. We just all kept looking at his toes. But we were just grunts, you know. I mean, it was, I don't know what happened on.
Okay. So you're basically parked there for a couple of weeks, and the rest of the battalion has moved on.
Well, they would go out on riffs and get into trouble and then come back.
Okay. So they were still
night.
using the bridge, or?
We were on one side
Yeah.
and the platoon was on the
Okay. All right. So they're still kind of operating in that area at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you have any idea what was going on elsewhere? Or?
We'd get bits and pieces when they get back in. They came back in, they came back in firing. They were coming back from that bad, and we were getting ricochet. We were getting friendly fire, and we hid behind the APC until they came and then turned into the night logger and that. But they were, one of the APCs hit a mine that took it up in the air and flipped it over and came down on its top. And I know the 50 gunner never got out. But we just didn't talk about it that much.
All right. And so you think you spent a couple of weeks there. Now, at that point, do you move on and advance farther into Cambodia?
We
or
were only allowed 30 kilometers, I guess, or
Okay.
30 miles or something is all we could go in.
Yeah.
They stopped us before we could have really made a difference. But at the end of 2 weeks, we just went back to Camp Frenzell Jones, I think, fire base Frenzell Jones.
All right. Now, having done that, do you go back to just patrolling the area, or what do you do next?
Rubber plantations and the surrounding areas.
All right. Now, were there particular rules and regulations for what you could do and not do on a rubber plantation?
Well, you weren't supposed to damage any of the trees, for sure. Because I found out, I don't know if it's true or not, but Lady Bird Johnson owned those 2 plantations.
I don't think she owned those.
So that's what I heard.
Yeah. So that might well have been the kind of thing somebody would say.
We didn't know it while we were there. I heard it after I got home and that. But we'd go from Dao Tiang to Tay Ninh to one of the rubber plantations or whatever. We just moved around. We would have a cache of weapons and food. We had, I don't know how many tons of rice we captured. 9mm machine guns and things like that. But
So you have, well, you're basically, you're patrolling when you're finding plenty of signs that there are enemy around. They've got all their caches, all their stores of stuff. But for the most part, were they not trying to fight you?
They'd take pot shots and you know, just to make us think or whatever and that. And now and then, I can't say that I threw a lot of ordnance downrange. We had a minigun mounted on our 50 turret.
Okay, explain what a minigun is.
A minigun is top speed of 7,000 rounds a minute, run off batteries. It's a continuous belt. Every 7th round is a red tracer. Communists had green tracers, so we knew who was shooting at us, and they knew who we were too by our tracers.
But a minigun can put out a lot of lead fast.
We were called to the front to mow some brush down quite a few times. But driving in this, you know, a majority of my time I was driving because I eventually got another APC when a driver went home. I never took a beat on anything. I don't know if it's a plague or not, but I don't know if I ever killed anybody. I don't know.
Okay.
Like I say, I threw a lot of ordnance. I had an M79 grenade launcher, and on night logger, I kept them thinking. If there was anything out there, I kept them thinking, and nobody ever said anything. I'd shoot a case of grenades in a night, you know, while I was on guard duty and that. I don't know, what was your
All right.
question?
Okay. And now, do you basically stay with that unit your whole time in Vietnam, or
Yes.
okay? All right. Now, did you spend much time on the base at Cu Chi?
Near the end, I did. We did, and you say some of the things we transported a lot. We Big Red One, First Air Cav. I can't remember, but we would transport units from one part of South Vietnam to others,
Okay.
and then come back and that. And then a lot of ARVNs, we would give them rides to different places and this and that.
Okay. And then, would you go in and out of Cu Chi when you're doing that, or?
We'd most generally be out in the field when they came walking in, and
Okay. All right.
give them a chance to rest or whatever and that. And then we were in there, we just, even though there was all this going on around, I just had tunnel vision, I guess.
Yeah, you had a very small world that you were part of.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you see much of the Vietnamese civilians?
Oh yeah, when we went through the villages and that, they'd get on the back, open the back door and try and get stuff out and things like that. I remember one time we stopped and chased them down a side street, and we're going, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
This is stupid. So
Okay.
we went back, but
All right. Sometimes people talk about people either trying to sell you things, or prostitutes kind of following along or getting in the vehicles. Did any of those kinds of things happen?
probably, but not a lot. We were moving on. So we did night logger at times near villages and that, and we'd sneak out, tell the 2 tracks, you know, we're going into the village, and you know, so they'd say okay, you know, they watch for us and stuff, whatever. But that was there. It was around, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. All right. I mean, and were there drugs around?
Yeah, not out in the field so much. I mean, I know, I remember we'd smoke some marijuana, and they'd tell us to come, and they'd come around, Top would come around, he said, we got some intel, you know, hold it down tonight. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So would you sometimes do that in a night logger position, or only when you're? Yeah. Okay. But not if you're out on an ambush patrol or something else like that.
No, not that I know of.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's, well,
Okay.
your awareness is, you get really aware when you're doing that. And it was, I think, kind of somewhat of an advantage, because it doesn't mess you up, you know, other ways than that. Your awareness, like even, you know, now shooting pool or doing some things like that, I mean, you just get tuned into it, and it's, I don't know.
Okay. So, because usually the assumption is that it can make you less prepared or less sensitive to things.
Probably could in civilian life, but when you're on top of things, if you're not, you're.
Okay. All right. Now, did you ever get an R&R when you were in Vietnam?
No.
Okay. Did you know that that was a possibility?
I knew that we had to leave, and we had an R&R coming, and came up somehow. A buddy of mine from New Jersey. We each got to leave, 1 week leave. So we said, okay. So we go to, I don't even remember if that was Cam Ranh Bay, where they flew out of there for that or not. But we were on leave, and we were in line, and they came up and they said, we got 2 seats for Hawaii. And we just stood there, because that was for married.
Yeah.
And they said, we got 2 seats for Hawaii. And we said, well, hell, we'll roll.
Okay.
Because we didn't know where we were going to go.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't know if we were going to Japan or Bangkok,
Mm-hmm.
or we had no idea where we were going. But we knew we weren't going to Hawaii.
Yeah.
But next thing we know, we're on a plane for Hawaii. And he says, if they've got a flight going to New Jersey, I'm going home.
Mm-hmm.
We got in the terminal, and he said, there it is. And he went and got a ticket, and they actually stopped the plane on the tarmac and took a set of stairs out there, and he got on the plane. And I watched him. I'm going, well, okay. And I look around, and Detroit, nonstop. So I bought a ticket, called my sister, and picked me up in Detroit. You're coming home? You know? Well, everybody thought I was home for good.
Yeah.
I was only home for 5 days. And they said, well, how long are you home? What are you doing now? I said, well, I'm going back to Vietnam. They go, what? I'm going, well, I'm AWOL right now. They says, if, I could be in big trouble. I might not ever see Vietnam again if they put it in rig or something like that. But anyway, we met back up at the end of the time, and I rented a motel or a hotel room, and well, no, I had rented a motel. I guess that's when I got back. I rented a hotel because I remember that. But yeah, I was back on the block and that was around Halloween time because I brought a pumpkin back and set it in the seat next to me and put the seat belt around on every time, from civilian from Detroit, Michigan to
Maybe Seattle or someplace if you went by Alaska to go back.
I don't know. It might have been a nonstop to I think it was a nonstop to Hawaii.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but
Well, you mentioned that you flew through Alaska at some point.
that was on my final trip when I finally came home.
Okay. All right.
We came in
But
that
anyway,
way.
so you've gone, and so you basically make it back to Vietnam pretty much on schedule?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now, how much time do you have left on your tour at that point?
That was around this time, and I left in February 15th, so it was
About
4
months.
or-
Okay. All right. Now, I don't know, what was it like to go back to Vietnam after having been home?
Nothing. I was
Okay.
just going through the motions. Like I said, tunnel vision. I doing what I'm supposed to do, and
Okay.
just
All right.
being a good soldier.
Okay. Now, were those last few months any different from what you had experienced before?
Yeah. August 31st, I was, actually that would have been before I
Yeah,
went back
okay.
home.
But
But I put that out of my mind, but that was the worst day of my life, was August 31st of 70. And, we rifted probably half the day, the whole company, for some reason. We did a rift, and that's just traveling around trying to kick up
yeah.
some incoming and deal with it. And we had pulled up in this big wide space. It was bulldozed, and it was just, you could see for a long ways. And they pulled us on line all in one point, and we sat there, and I remember Bridge Over Troubled Water was playing on the bridge track, because we had a 60-foot bridge traveled with us. And everybody just kicked back, enjoying the sun and this and that. And all of a sudden, we got a call that they wanted the lieutenant at headquarters. And they picked 3-3. At this time, I was driving 3-3 track. And they wanted 2, and there was only two left out of our platoon, or our squad. And so I was leading, and they just told us, they said, well, you go down here, because we had never been in that territory before, didn't know where it was. And it was pretty wide open and this and that, but some brush, berms and stuff. And I I remember I made a left-hand turn because the road took a 90. And as soon as I got my turn complete and started forward, I thought I had hit another landmine. Now, this is where my laterals were broken, my extensions, so I was down inside driving off the actual gas pedal and all that stuff. And I thought I hit the explosion, I thought I hit another mine. So I got up and started to come out of the turret or the, I don't even know what we call that.
Yeah, a hatch or whatever.
But Sergeant Gobert was right behind me and he said, go. So I went back down inside. Well, when that RPG hit, there's two straps that run along each side of the, I got a bad shoulder here,
Okay.
but each side that you pull a lever in the back tailgate falls down. Well, those straps are about this thick and that wide whenever they'd run. Well, we would take a case of each colored smoke grenades and slide the spoon into that, behind that, and then bend it down. So up on top, guys could reach down and grab a color of whatever we needed. They were all there. And I'd say there was about 100, 150 grenades. When that RPG went through, the concussion set all of those grenades off at once. And I'm down here, I was driving with my periscopes. When he said go, I still had my tracks. I didn't, you know, I thought I'd hit a mine and I was dead in the water. Well, I wasn't. I think those smoke grenades lasted for 7 minutes, I think. And when I finally quit driving, they were done. And I stopped and I put it in park, turned the key off, and got up out of there, and there was nobody there. There wasn't nobody in sight. And I could see for a long ways. I said, where in the hell am I going to go? I'm out there in the middle of nowhere. My armored personnel carrier is on fire.
So when the smoke grenades went off inside it, were you separated from that, or did you have smoke in there with you while you're still driving?
I had to use the periscopes
Okay.
to
All right. So you're
drive.
surrounded by smoke inside of this thing, and you're just using the periscope to look outside to see where you're going, because you could fit the periscope to your eyes, basically.
Well, it was a manual.
Yeah.
It was there stationary. It was just a square, and
Okay.
So I'm standing there, and I've got I didn't have a shirt on. My weapons were, I had an M60 mounted on in front of me. But, you know, I wasn't even thinking about it. I got off there anyway, and I'm thinking maybe I can get my duffel bag out of this thing, because there's nobody around.
So the men who were on the APC, they're gone?
Some of them, a couple of them got blown off. One got burnt pretty good.
But nobody had ridden out there with you?
I assumed they were all there. I don't know.
Okay.
I never did find out what happened to all of them. But I guess I got greedy or whatever. I thought I knew where my duffel bag was, so I climbed up on the track and looked over, because we had the 4x4. I guess you'd call it a sunroof or something. And that was always open when we were traveling in that. But I got up there and climbed up there, and I looked down there, and here was my 50 gunner laying down there. And he was looking up at me. He was on his stomach looking up at me. And he'd been in all that smoke. And he had no idea what was going on with him. But he was mortally wounded. I knew he was a dead man. But I knew I had to get him out. And so my duffel bag, I was able to get him out.
Mm-hmm.
The hand grenades were starting to go off, and you know, blasting cat. I don't. It was just.
Yeah. So there was. So the vehicle was still on fire at this point.
It burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
It burnt down to the chassis. Well, they got the one that was following me. Before he made that 90-degree turn,
Mm-hmm.
they hit 50. An RPG hit the 50 turret dead on, and Jimmy Hepler was in that, and he didn't make it.
Okay. So both vehicles got hit with RPGs there.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, I mean, what happens to you? How do you get out of there?
Well, I got Phil on the ground, and his leg was just hanging on by his kneecap, one of his legs. And I tried to get him, because I got him in a bear hug. His entire back, from his neck down to his belt, his organs, everything
Mm-hmm.
were right there. And I got him in a bear hug, facing me, and got him up over the side. And I said, if I can just get his leg, you know, because he's in shock. He doesn't know anything, I don't think. And just as I got his leg got up there, he somehow turned around and saw it. He goes, oh, my leg. And this guy had 2 kids. He was married. This is what he told me, because we got a lot of time when we were at the night logger, just him and I pulling guard. And he was an eccentric, didn't have a lot of things going on. Never knew that his first name was Charles. He went by his middle name, Phil, because he didn't want him to, because Charlie, Chuck, you know, that was the enemy.
Yeah.
Never knew that until about 5 years ago, when I got some information off of a computer, and it had his full name on there. And I'm going, whoa, never knew that. But I turned coward that day, because it wasn't long, but the company, or somebody from the company or platoon or battalion had come, and they stopped about 300 yards away, because all they could see was wreckage, and I was behind, and I heard them, I guess, but they stopped, and they're just going, what are we going to do? And I said, you get over here. And when Doc Dixon got there, I said, give him as much morphine as you can, because I think he was on his back, so their injuries, other than his leg, weren't visible in that. But I didn't stay with him. I didn't help going and put him on the dust off. I was afraid. I didn't want to go, even though my personnel carry was on fire and everything was going on. I didn't want to leave that spot.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I got onto another APC. I don't know anybody on there or what, but I got to ride back to the rear.
Mm-hmm.
But I should have gotten on that chopper with him. I should have been there.
You got him out of the vehicle, which was the most important thing to do, and the doc was there.
And that gives me a lot of relief. But I should have stayed with him, because I don't know if he was still alive when they got him on the chopper or not. How he was even alive. How he was, I don't know how.
Yeah. Okay. So after that, was it not too long after that event? I guess it was a little while before you actually got to leave. Do they give you any kind of break after that, or you just go to another APC and just go back to the usual business?
Business as usual. So you didn't really try and get close to anybody
Mm-hmm.
because of that.
Right.
And I blocked it out of my mind for a long time, a lot of years. To see everything that I owned was in that duffel bag. My photo albums, especially. When I came home, I had nothing to show anybody. If they asked, nobody ever asked me anything. My father, nobody asked me anything about anything.
Now, had you been taking pictures in Vietnam, or did you just bring stuff from home when you went over?
No, it was pictures that other guys. I didn't do a whole lot of photography, but somebody took them, and then they'd have copies and pass them around and that. So we had albums. I sent one picture. I was going to bring it today. I got one picture standing beside my personnel carrier at Frenzel Jones about 2 weeks before we went into Cambodia. And but I have nothing to reminisce. I have nothing. It's an empty feeling because it was a very big part of my life when it boils down to it. And I'm in an emotional basket most of the time. So.
All right. So you got through that, and now and then you basically go back to the regular business. You get your leave. You get home briefly. You come back. So now after you're back, after you get back and you brought your bumpkin back, do you just go back to driving a track again?
That was the only two. I hit a landmine and then got ambushed, and I was a grunt back on the ground again.
Okay, so now you're just an infantryman again.
Yeah.
Okay, and still basically in the same area, conducting the same kinds of patrols.
Well, I didn't find out until years later that my unit was being phased out.
Okay.
We were starting to de-escalate. Because they weren't replacing, we weren't getting new equipment, this and that. They were just letting it, and actually they decommissioned, and I spent more time in the rear. For some reason, I know I get up in the morning, go to morning formation, go to the motor pool. We'd get a deuce and a half full of empty barrels, and we'd drive around the company area, kicking them empty barrels off and putting loaded ones on, and then shuffling them up to the front and this and that. And that was by 10 o'clock we were done, and we had inhabited some bunkers for hooches or something. We were living in those. I don't remember how long. Things get fuzzy in that. We were in that position for a while, but it just really pissed me off because Phil, the guy that was mortally wounded there, man, my head's going in so many different directions right now. I can't pull one thought out of the.
Okay. Basically,
man, I can't.
okay. Well, you were upset about something relating to what happened to Phil, or?
Oh, the day we went out, Phil had 6 days to go.
Okay.
And he asked him if he could stay behind. And they said, no, you're not only going out, but you're not the 50 gunner anymore. You're on the 60 gun that had been mounted on a pole on the right side. We were de-escalating. We were standing down to a certain extent because of my unit, that the 5th Mechanized was being disbanded.
You weren't really even trying to win a war anymore at that point. You're kind
We
of
didn't know
killing
that.
time.
I didn't know that until 4 or 5 years ago that I've
Mhm.
gotten this information.
Yeah.
It has been on the computer of what my unit did that month. I've got it out in the vehicle.
Yeah.
They never should have sent him out there.
Mhm.
Another one of my friends would have died, but they put him in the 50 turret and put Phil out on the out. And especially finding out that they didn't need him, they could have left him behind. You know,
Mhm.
6 days.
All right. So who's giving that kind of order? Is that a sergeant, or is that an officer, or do you not know?
Officers, I'm pretty sure. I don't know if it was talked about or not, but when he came and to join us, we were getting ready to go, and he climbed on top, and I think Dennis probably started to get out of the turret, and he said, no. He says, I'm demoted. I've got to be over here.
All right.
And he was the only one on my track that was basically the only one that was wounded.
Mhm.
And Jimmy was cut in half. Sergeant Robinson was trying to get him out, and he couldn't,
Mhm.
because he was still alive too, and that armored personnel carrier was burning to the ground.
Okay. So that was the other carrier? Yeah. All right. Okay. What impression did you have of the officers that you dealt with?
L.T. Decker was a piece of work. But he was doing the same thing, because Sergeant Robinson hadn't seen him going through the berm line. He wouldn't have known where to go either, because he was trying to rescue
Mm-hmm.
somebody. And everybody split. And they knew that Phil was down there. That they had to have known he was down there. Is when I looked in there, I was being greedy. I was trying to get my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I guess to back up a little bit, kind of look over this now, is there anything else that went on in the last few months there that kind of stands out in your memory, or did you do anything that was different? I mean, or did you mostly just now drive people around different places, or?
No, I was doing the garbage. We were doing the company area garbage detail,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd go to the dump, which was outside of Cucci. I did take a Jeep and take officers out in the bush a little bit. There was no escort. It was just me and the Jeep and him.
Okay.
So it was not a threat. I don't even know if I probably had a 45 with me, and that would have been probably the only thing, because my M16, I threw that on a shelf in the APC and covered it up, because you had to turn it back in.
Yep.
And it was a Mattel toy gun to me. It jammed in basic trainer. Well, we had it in basic and AIT both. And isn't that spring going back and forth in there? I'm going, no, this is not a weapon that I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an M1, I had a M60, I had an M79 grenade launcher, and a 45 is what I relied on.
Okay. All right. Now, as you get toward the end of your tour, are you kind of counting days, or do you not really know when you're going to leave?
I knew when I was leaving. I did not know anything about the early out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got in line to come home, they told me I had to go get a haircut. I said, screw you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they weren't going to let me on the plane, so I had to get a haircut and catch the next flight.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember what you asked me.
All right. Well, basically I was just asking about that process for getting you home and how that works. So you basically have a date and you get to go back to.
Yeah, I think I
rear.
found, well, if I'd have gone back the day before, I would have had 150 days. But having to wait, get a haircut and wait for the next day, I had 149 days.
Okay.
And that was a definite ETS as soon as I hit Fort Dix. And
So explain a little bit. So basically, you're going to be able to get out of the Army early, and so why was that possible, or what was going on then?
I don't know. Anybody that had 150 days or less was in the jungle one day, on the block the next. No debriefing, not a damn thing.
Okay. Because normally, if you had gone back the day earlier, you would have been sent to some base in the U.S. to kind of finish out your time.
I might have, I might not have. I think 150 days was it, and I would have been right on
Okay.
right on it that time there. But
All right. So at what point do you find out you just get to leave the Army? Was that when you got to Fort Dix, or?
I knew it, I think, before we left Vietnam, but
Okay.
not very far.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would have made, you wouldn't want to know that, because that would have been even more of a bad luck charm on
Yeah.
you or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So so when you're flying home, this is the time when you think that you go through Alaska and then come back.
I think we went to Japan
Yep.
and then Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we went straight to Fort Dix, and that was weird because coming from that way, whatever, people wonder why I went to Fort Dix, but that's just where we went.
Great circle route. You fly over
And
Canada.
and the buddy that had jumped ship in Hawaii and went home lived there. He actually came and picked me up. He'd gotten home a month earlier, and he came, him and his girlfriend came and picked me up. I'd fallen asleep. There was nobody in the room. Everybody had deed him out. They were gone. And he had to come and find me and wake me up and say, you know, here we go. And I ended up spending a week there, trying to, I guess, debrief. Because I'm, you know, had to get that haircut, so I'm sticking out like a sore thumb. I didn't have anybody, well, I was in civilian clothes, so I didn't get any of the spitting and you know, things like that. But people looked at me and they could probably tell by my haircut. But I hung out there for a few days, for a week. It was, my parents had saved Christmas for me when I got home.
Yeah.
And I told them I wasn't going to be there for another week, and oh, they were mad. They were. I don't know if they ever forgave me for that, but it was February 15th. And I just knew that I needed some time. I needed to do something. So I did, and I don't know if it helped or not. It didn't really, but
Okay.
went back, and of course they wanted me to go to work. Go back to work. My family was they bought the old feed mill in town and put a hardware store in there and a lumber yard out back, and well, they wrote me and had written me in Vietnam and wanted to know if I wanted to be a part of it. And I went, hell yeah, we'd been doing that for home improvements for something from the time I was 14 or less until the time I went in. You know, and I said, well, yeah, I want to see that grow and that.
So is that what you did then when you got back, as you went to work with the family?
I drew unemployment for a couple of months. I don't know, I've always been weird and doing my own, doing different things, whatever, but I finally went to work, and a year and a half later, I had worked for the IBEW before I got drafted, and you have a year to reclaim your job after you get back. I think it's a year. But about a year and a half into it, I plumbed a new house that we built, and my uncle praised a friend of mine who was a co-worker. He said, "Hey, you did a nice job on that." You know, he says, "I didn't do the plumbing." He says, "I did the electrical." He said, "Well, who did the plumbing?" And he said, "Well, Roger." Well, a couple of hours later, my uncle came on the job site because my uncle and my dad went together in this whole venture. And he came in and did a walkthrough, see how we were doing, because we were doing the drywall. I mean, we built the houses from
Yeah.
the basement up. And he started to leave. He went out, he was going through the garage, and I went out. He said, "Hey, Uncle Les, how come you didn't give me an attaboy pat on the back, you know, for that? You're a family, you're expected to do that."
Oh.
And he fired me.
Oh, good.
He fired me for doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And me just saying, "Hey, you know, 2 weeks ago, he had told Chuck this, but he fired me. And I lost out on my seniority for the IBEW because I could have gone, that first year I could have gone and had 4 years, basically it would have been 4 years of but that was gone, and I just dropped out. I dropped out. My dad said, "Well, we can go back to insulating and roofing and windows and siding," and I did that for a while, but I said, I'm crawling around in 100, 150-year-old houses in the attics, and that's not a fun thing, you know. And then all of a sudden here we're building brand new houses, stick. And then I said, and a group of us, 4 of us, just went to Colorado. Stayed there for 6 weeks or so, and in the meantime I'd went to Arizona to visit my sister, and we spent Christmas in Arizona, came back to Colorado, and my buddy's wife was going to take the kids away from him if he didn't come back home, so I rode back with him, got my car, went back out there, blew my engine going into Boulder. They replaced the engine because it was under the warranty, and made it back down to Phoenix and spent New Year's in Phoenix again. Christmas in Phoenix, New Year's in Phoenix, but why am I talking about that?
Well, basically, we just kind of thought, did you have kind of a longer career doing something? Did you find regular work for a while that you liked, or?
I had 23 jobs from the time I got out of Nam until they took me out of the truck for sleep apnea, which I don't have. But in 2006, I was 56 years old. I haven't worked since then.
Okay. So you were a truck driver for a while? That was the last thing you did?
I was driving truck, Michigan train, best job I ever had, driving doubles and that. But I kicked around for several years, and I had driven truck. I'd started driving truck at 14 with a moving van all around. I had been in 38 states since before I graduated high school. So I kind of got back into that, and then I don't know if you've heard of a company in Allegan. They do health and beauty aids. I had gotten married and got a job working there. So I drove truck for them for 8 years, and then I went into management in the warehouse. They had a bid, and I thought I could change things and make things better, which I did, but they didn't like that. I didn't do it right. I was just a truck driver. I didn't know how to do all that, whatever. But I was there 14 years altogether. And then they started getting crappy, and I just said, I'm not putting up with this. Come to find out, I was the second one of 100 supervisors that they got rid of that year because they were downsizing.
Okay.
And I didn't know that for 2 years because I was the second one, and I was in a satellite warehouse away from the main stuff, so we were kind of out of it.
Okay. All right.
So I went back to driving truck and mostly, but companies would sell and get rid of everybody, or they different things in that. But I had 23 taxable jobs after I got out of Vietnam.
All right. And it's the kind of thing where you can look back. I mean, the time in your service, clearly there were a lot of negative consequences of that. I mean, you got sort of the PTSD type issues.
And that's only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, you know,
I had to pay
and
to get out of
and then
Vietnam.
the jobs and the rest of it and that kind of thing. Do you think there was anything positive for you in terms of your service time? Did you take anything good out of it?
Well, the problem is I took too many things from it and applied it to daily life, not knowing it as really, but there are things that work that can be done in civilian life that if you do it like washing dishes or this and that, the procedure that we went through, it was, you know, well, I would try to help with housework. I had 2 sisters and I was the youngest, and I did the outside work. I never made a bed. I never did anything like that in the house. I fed the animals and all that. So I didn't know too much about that stuff. I knew about it, but I didn't physically know how to do it or whatever, didn't desire to do it.
And then did you learn some of that kind of thing in the Army, or the Army way of doing those things?
Yep. Well, see, I lost my job as platoon guide because of my lack of, you know, not straight enough.
Yeah,
I didn't,
yeah.
you know, I just didn't do stuff. I lived on a farm, for crying out loud. When you unhooked a piece of machinery, you left it there until you needed it the next season almost. You know, there was no order. You just grease it up and go. Yeah, I'm just.
Yeah. Well, I'd ask you, was there a positive element to the service time for you, or in the?
Yeah. These days, what's going on these days, I don't know if I'd have gone. I don't agree with a lot of things that are going on. And but yes, there's a lot of things that they teach you in the military. I mean, if it's not, it's got to be right. You know, they can't be doing things wrong and be. Excuse me. Yeah, and I think I carried that into. I lost my family. I got married a second time. I had 2 daughters of the first marriage and 2 with the second. Raised a stepdaughter. And I thought all these years I thought I was doing good, but in fact my stepdaughter, shortly after or about a year after she graduated high school, because she moved out the next day. And she called me and she's brought chills to my spine. I actually I teared up. She said, Dad, she says, we didn't really care for the way you raised us. She said, but you did a good job. She says, I know now, you know. And it just like, wow, that kept me going for quite a while to have her say that, because we weren't all that close or anything. Yeah, but I appreciated that. And, but I just thought, you know, things worked. But in the military, you told somebody to do something and they did it. You know, and the girls just had their heels dug in.
Yeah,
and it
I'm
caused
the same way.
It caused friction. And right now, to this day, I haven't talked. I live within 10 miles of 4 of them.
All right.
And the other one's in North Carolina, but she's the only one I talk to because she needs help. But the other ones,
All right.
they don't want to run into me.
Okay. All right. To kind of look back over your military history career, is there anything else you want to add on the record before we close out the interview?
Well, I had an issue with payroll. 3 months after I was in Nam, they started paying me as an E2. I wasn't even supposed to be in the field. E1s weren't supposed to be in the country to start with, I believe.
Yeah. You're supposed to be an E2 automatically once you...
Well,
Go
I'd
over.
been busted to E1
Yeah, right.
in Oakland,
Right.
so when I got there, they paid me as an E1.
Yeah.
3 months later, they started paying me as an E2. And I went to Top. We were out in the night logger, and I said, Top, I says, I didn't get any orders for this. He said, well, you better go to the rear and get it straightened out. So the next chopper, I went back to the rear, and I went in and said, hey, you know, I went to the finance clerk, and I didn't get any orders for this. He says, they'll catch up with you. You're an E2. Go back out in the field. Okay. I go back to the field, and I look around, and there's not as many carriers around, and there's people missing. They got into the big one. 3 months later, they started paying me as an E3. I went to Top. I said, Top, I haven't even gotten my E1s yet. Well, you better go to the rear and straighten it out. So I go to the rear. Clerk tells me the same damn thing. You're an E3, an E2, or an E3.
E3 now,
then
yeah.
go back out in the field. So back out in the field I go. 3 months later, they start paying me as an E4. And I still haven't gotten any orders. I go to Top. When I got back the second time, less armored personnel carriers, different people. They had gotten hit. They got into some scunion. The fourth, I says, I didn't get orders. He says, we're going back. He pulled the whole company up. We went back to the rear. He says, we're not. Every time you leave, we catch hell. I didn't do anything.
Oh.
Well, anyway, next payday, and we got paid in cash out in the field. They gave me $13 and a note, come to finance. And that was, and I don't know if they pulled up then or not. Maybe I was in the rear. So I go in there, and they said, you're a private E1, you owe the government $1,200. And until you pay that money, you will not get out of Vietnam. And I'm going, what the hell? Well, the JAG office was one hooch over. But they had boardwalks about like this. And it was monsoon time. Well, I came out and went to the end, got on this sidewalk to head over and go to the JAG office. There's a 4-star general walking. The only one around is a 4-star general walking down. And he was on his tiptoes on the side of that when I walked past him. And he says, you don't salute an officer troop? I said, not anymore. And he says, well, what's the matter? He says, wait a minute, what's going on? And I said, well, I told him the story. He says, well, he ended up getting me an E3, but I still had to write home and get sick because I had sent my money home, most of it. I had to get $600 sent to me in the mail and pay that $600 back before they would, or they wouldn't have let me out of Vietnam. I should have told them to take it out of my hide if you want or whatever, and this that, because I was going to buy a stereo, you know. I had that money that I was going to do something with, and that turned me about as bitter as anything there.
Yeah.
It's just money, but
Yeah. But they mess up your life in enough other ways, and then they want you to pay them for it.
yeah.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty remarkable story, and I appreciate your willingness to share that. It's part of why we do this, is understand what actually happens to ordinary people who wind up in these places. And you've done a good job of telling it at the end, so thank you very much.
I'm doing anything and anything to get, I'm being greedy again because I'm trying to heal myself. After all these years, you know, 50 years it took 46 years for me to find out that I even have benefits coming. They don't tell you if you don't ask, or we don't
Yeah.
tell each other.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and they haven't done anything, I don't think, for PTSD or Agent Orange in the last 50 years.
Well,
I'm putting myself out there and going to groups. I've been in, I think, 12 group therapy sessions. I spent 6 weeks in Battle Creek. One of the last classes they had for PTC, PCT.
PTSD, yeah.
Well, they have a PCT clinic. I think it's PCT clinic
Okay.
for PTSD, but I spent 6 weeks there just trying to fit in or whatever and this and that. Being around other veterans it's just a natural calming
Yeah.
for that, but I don't know how many psychologists I've seen. Psychiatrists kick me out. So I've seen many psychologists. I'm seeing one once a month now, 2 of them actually, and anything I can get, anything I can grab. I've lost everything in my life. I've been a failure in everything in my life. And being in the military, that's been a most constant, it's an everyday thing. I'm constantly back and forth from Vietnam and,
Yeah.
and places in between. And
Yeah.
I don't think I would have ever enlisted. If I hadn't been drafted, I doubt that I would have enlisted. But
Yeah.
I did what
you-
they
you-
wanted me to do, and
You're doing what you can now to get some control over it, which is a legitimate thing to do. All right then.
and Vietnam veterans were committing suicide at 70 a day back in when I did that clinic thing. Now it's down to, I think, 30 something. I don't understand that. I mean, I can if it doesn't go through our minds once a day or more. It's always right there.
It's a reminder on some level that war is a bad business, and it does bad things to people. And
Yes, but we've got to revisit it. We've got to go in and hash it over. Because each time I do it, I don't know if I feel better or not, but I've been able to help other veterans in the group, because we'll sit around there and look at each other and I just start talking.
Yeah.
I says, we're here, and I said, apologize, tell me to, and they said, no, go for it, go for it.
And you can also help ones who were younger than you are, because they are actually, I will bring the younger veterans together, the Vietnam guys, and you have a lot in common with them, and then they know enough to respect you and take you
It
seriously.
was a strange enough war that it stands out, and it always will. Things were different on almost every plane, everything that was going on.
Yeah. And
yeah. But I bend over backwards for these guys that are stepping up. When the veterans quit coming home, this country is already in deep doo-doo. We've got a window right here with the president that's going on. I believe is the only window that we had to keep our country somewhat sane, and it's being done. And yeah, I'm afraid how it's going to go if we don't get a handle on it right now. We got very few years left to get the train back on track as much as we can.
All right. All right. I think that makes for a pretty good closing statement. So, thank you.
You're welcome.